Throughout history, there have been people who have committed some of the most heinous crimes fathomable. For those crimes, they have been convicted and sentenced to death. Welcome to Death Row Executions, where we take a look into the lives of society's worst offenders. And now, your host, Air.
Wendi Andriano, born Wendi Ochoa, was born on August 6, 1970. She grew up in a religious household, and her family had to travel a lot for ministry. Despite the constant traveling, Wendi excelled in school. She did, however, feel that her upbringing was extremely strict and she was troubled. She claimed that a minister had once exposed himself to her. She also claimed that she thinks that she was sexually assaulted by her father, but cannot remember the incident. We will never know if it was a dream or a traumatic event her mind tried to erase. In a poem titled Secrets that Wendi wrote, some of the text read, "A little girl burrows deep into a pile of blankets behind a closet door. She yearns for a place of safety and warmth, free from the painful love adults shower upon her. Cloaked in darkness, the silence magnifies the confusion. She desperately wants to be loved, but why does it feel so dirty? Instinctively, she knows the secrets must be kept, or love and approval will be denied. Just sleep. No more thoughts, no more fear. Sleep, my little one, sleep." She awakens to shame and guilt. These will later become lifelong companions. Guilt because she must be loved, painful or not. Shame because she feels deserving of this secret-laden love. This makes her feel like a bad girl. She crawls out of the closet, the secrets buried deep. The need for love was never a choice. Wendi needed that love. She found it when she met a man named Joseph Andriano. The two married in January of 1994, settled in a suburb outside of Phoenix, Arizona, and had 2 children together. Unfortunately, in 1998, just 4 years after they married, Joseph grew sick. He tried to heal himself with medication and holistic therapies after being misdiagnosed multiple times, but nothing worked. Finally, after searching for answers, he was diagnosed with terminal cystic carcinoma. In 2000, he finally agreed to undergo chemotherapy, but he was still in a bad condition. Wendi grew tired of taking care of Joseph. She felt overworked, and it wasn't the type of marriage she signed up for. 30-year-old Wendi believed she was too young to be taking care of 2 children and a sick husband who was not able to do anything for her. Joe would always text or verbally ask Wendi for things. In one exchange, she said, "Joe, really? You could get these yourself." Joseph replied by saying, "It's hard for me to get out of the chair." In response to that statement, Wendi said, "Sure it is." Wendi wanted to be free from responsibility. She started spending less time at home and more time at work or with others. One day, she told Joseph that she had to go to work, and he asked her to grab his gray beanie before she left so he could stay warm. She told him, "Joe, I can't do this for everyone, okay? I can't take care of everyone all the time. Have it." Wendi worked as an apartment manager for a living, so she ended up leaving the house and went to work. After leaving work, instead of heading home, she met up with her coworker by the name of Rick. Rick was just one of few men Wendi cheated on Joseph with. Wendi and Rick eventually ended their affair, but remained friends. Despite ending the affair, Wendi felt comfortable enough to ask Rick if he would pose as her husband for a hospital visit, so the hospital staff would deem him healthy and he could receive insurance. To Wendi's surprise, Rick refused Wendi's request. In an exchange, Wendi said, "We need your help. Look, I'll give you $10,000. Rick replied, "I can't." Something else that is also a surprise is that in court documents, it mentions that Joseph went along with Wendi's idea of having people pretend to be him for pre-screening life insurance appointments. Not being able to get help from others, Wendi decided to try and get life insurance out on Joe on her own from multiple companies. She claimed Joe was not suffering from cancer. Companies were turning her down left and right. One employee actually called Joseph after receiving an electronic pre-application from Wendi, but Joseph told the employee he was no longer interested in applying anymore. 3 days after this phone call, Wendi sent an email from her personal account asking that Joseph's request be reinstated and that all future communication should be with her and her alone. The company ended up refusing to offer a life insurance policy. Seeing that her $10,000 offer to Rick failed, Wendi offered $50,000 to 2 more people to help her out with pretending to be Joseph, but these friends refused, just like Rick. Wendi had enough and was soon thinking of ways to end Joseph's life. He was taking too long to die naturally, and she did not expect him to be alive so long after his terminal diagnosis. On October 7, 2000, Wendi, her 2 children, and a sick Joseph went to a barbecue to socialize with others. They left the barbecue and returned to their apartment at around midnight. A couple of hours later, at around 2:15 a.m. on October 8th, Wendi called her coworker Chris, who also happened to live at the same apartment complex as her. She asked Chris to look after her children while she took Joseph to the doctor. Chris agreed, and when he arrived, Wendi said, "Chris, I have a problem. Don't ask any questions. My husband is on the floor dying, and I haven't called 911 yet. He doesn't know I haven't called 911 yet." Chris was very uncomfortable and urged Wendi to call for help. Chris entered the home, and Wendi went into another room to call 911. Chris noticed Joseph on the floor lying in the fetal position with a pool of vomit right under his face area. Chris noticed that Joseph was on the floor lying in the fetal position with a pool of vomit right under his face area. Chris observed that Joseph looked weak and was having issues breathing. Joseph mustered up enough strength to ask Chris for help. He said he has been needing help for a long time, and then questioned why it was taking over 45 minutes for the paramedics to arrive. Little did he know, his wife was anticipating his death. After calling for help, Wendi reconvened to where Chris and Joseph were, and then asked Chris if she could borrow his car so she could drive Joseph to the hospital because paramedics were responding to another call. Joseph was unable to get up by himself, so Wendi attempted to pick him up, but she wasn't able to. Angered by Joseph's weakened state, Wendi began berating him, yelling at him, and calling him names. Joseph began vomiting on himself again. Chris heard sirens in the distance, so instead of telling Wendi to stop what she was doing, he left the apartment to find paramedics in order to direct them to the right apartment. Paramedics were unloading their equipment when Wendi rushed out of the apartment, met with them, and began screaming for them to go away. She ran back into her house, but paramedics did not leave. They knocked on her door, but she refused to answer it. The paramedics then reached out to the Phoenix Fire Department alarm room after about 10 minutes of knocking. They called Wendi's landline, and Wendi spoke with them. The fire department then contacted the paramedics and let them know that they spoke with Wendi, and she agreed to meet with them. Instead of opening the front door, Wendi exited her back door, climbed over her patio wall, and then walked around the apartment to meet with paramedics. Chris noticed that her hair was wet, and she was wearing different clothing than she had on before paramedics arrived. She communicated with everyone that Joseph was dying of cancer and had a do not resuscitate order in place. She was quoted saying, "This was not the way that he wanted to go." Chris, along with paramedics, left without ever entering the apartment again. At 3:39 a.m., 911 received yet another call from Wendi. The same exact paramedics who arrived the first time were the same ones to arrive the second time. When they made it to her apartment, they noticed Wendi standing outside, but this time she was wearing a bloody shirt, talking to police officers. Paramedics entered the apartment and they found Joseph lying on the floor unresponsive. He had wounds all over his body and multiple possible murder weapons surrounding him. There was a broken bar stool, pieces of a lamp, sharp kitchen utensils, a pillow, and a belt. All items had blood on them. When investigators did a full search of Wendi's home, they opened a cardboard box that had a 500-gram bottle of sodium azide in it, along with 2 plastic containers containing the sodium azide, 9 Q-tips, plastic utensils, and 2 pairs of latex gloves. Fingerprint samples were taken at the crime scene, and it turned out that Wendi's fingerprints were on the plastic utensils and the vacuum-packaged bag the cardboard box was shipped in. After further searching, investigators found gelatin capsules that were filled with sodium azide in a bottle that was intended for herbal supplements. Traces of sodium azide were found in a pot and 2 different bowls of soup that were in the kitchen. From that 500-gram bottle of sodium azide, police could not account for 20.8 grams of it. An autopsy was conducted on Joseph, and it was determined that he suffered from brain hemorrhaging due to at least 23 blows to the head. There were defensive wounds and also wounds in his neck that extended all the way to his spine, which severed his carotid artery. There were defensive wounds and also wounds in his neck that extended all the way to his spine, which severed an artery. Sodium azide was found in his blood and gastric contents. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. Investigators speculated that Joseph was in the fetal position and in pain the first time Wendi called 911 because he had ingested the sodium azide. Joseph was not dying fast enough for Wendi, so she resorted to physically assaulting him. Wendi was taken into custody and immediately called one of her coworkers to see if he would be able to go into her office at work and hide certain items that would incriminate her. No one close to Wendi had her back, and they were all willing to divulge everything to authorities. Wendi's adoptive father told detectives that when Joseph was killed, she called him and admitted to killing him. Wendi was indicted on 1 count of first-degree murder, and the state was seeking the death penalty because there were 2 aggravating factors. The first aggravating factor was that she committed the murder expecting financial gain. The second factor was that she committed the murder in an especially heinous, cruel, and depraved manner. During trial, Wendi claimed that she should be found not guilty because she assisted Joseph with his wishes to die. She said that when the sodium azide that he apparently knew about failed to kill him, they got into a fight and she assaulted the frail Joseph in self-defense. She also claimed that Joseph was the one who took matters into his own hands and he was the reason and cause of his own death. Wendi's hairdresser testified in court, and she claimed that in February of 2000, Wendi confided in her and told her that she would have divorced Joseph if it weren't for his illness. At a different hair appointment, Wendi told her that Joseph wanted to keep the marriage together, but she was emotionally out of it and wished he was dead so she could move on with her life. At a later date, Wendi went in for another hair appointment, and she told her stylist that she was interested in another man who hesitated to get involved in a relationship with her because she was married. The court brought up her affairs, and Rick testified that he did have a relationship with Wendi, but he had no idea she was married with children and broke it off as soon as he found out. The court also learned that Wendi grew obsessed with Rick and would not take not being in a relationship with him for an answer. On one occasion, she waited outside of his apartment late at night and banged on his door for about 5 minutes straight, demanding to be let in. Rick did not open the door until Wendi threatened to get the master pass key if he did not open up. After finally getting over Rick, Wendi started going to bars on a weekly basis with coworkers and friends, and it was a regular occurrence to see her dancing, flirting, and kissing other men. When Joseph was receiving his 4th round of chemotherapy, Wendi went out to a club, hooked up with a man in the club, and then allowed him to come back to her place so they could have intercourse. After their sexual encounter, the man left, but in an attempt to keep this new guy in her life, she told him that her husband died of cancer. The jury deliberated, and although they did not find the financial gain an aggravating factor in the murder, they did find her crime to be especially cruel and heinous, so they recommended Wendi be sentenced to death. Judge Brian K. Ishikawa agreed with the recommendation, and Wendi was sentenced to death on December 22, 2004. One appeal had 11 points of error, with one of them being that it wasn't fair that they talked about her affairs and attempts to obtain life insurance in court because it was irrelevant to why Joseph died. Wendi was quoted saying that the prosecutor took every opportunity to infuse the trial with marginally relevant information about my partying and man-chasing. The appeal response was that all information presented during trial was relevant. Wendi is currently on death row at the Lumley unit in the Arizona State Prison Complex, and her inmate number is 191593. In a separate video, I will be reading her poem titled Secrets, and I will leave the link to that video in the comments below.